Today, we talk about a moment that shook not only a nation, but the global balance of power. On August 18, 2025, the flag of the United States was lowered in the capital of Burkina Faso. The embassy shut down. Staff were ordered to leave, and it was not done by war or by protest. It was done by decision. The decision of one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, head of state, commander of the armed forces, and, now, a symbol of defiance in a world that often demands silence from the poor. He gave the United States 72 hours to pack up and leave. The message was clear. This is our land. You do not speak for us anymore. And if you call our soldiers criminals, then your presence is no longer welcome. It was a move that stunned the world. Washington called it diplomatic suicide. Paris called it reckless. Brussels warned of isolation. But in Ouagadougou, the people called it something else. They called it dignity. Traoré stood on the balcony of the presidential palace. Looking out over the city, he said, "We are not expelling a building. We are expelling an attitude, the arrogance that has chained Africa too long." He did not shout. He did not plead. He simply stated what millions across the continent have long felt. That aid without respect is not aid. It is control. That diplomacy without dignity is not diplomacy. It is submission. This moment was not about just one country. It was about a question still unanswered across Africa and beyond. Can a poor nation choose dignity over dependency and still survive? Or is survival always tied to silence? The story of August 18th is more than a headline. It is a turning point, because it tells us that power is not always measured in dollars or armies. Sometimes, it is measured in the courage to say no, and now, with one embassy closed and one flag lowered, Burkina Faso stands alone. Or does it? This story begins with a signature, but where it leads, no one can say for sure. On the morning of August 18th, 2025, the main avenues of Ouagadougou were sealed off. Soldiers lined the boulevard leading to the United States Embassy. They stood in silence, rifles over their shoulders, eyes fixed on the gray steel gates ahead. Inside, American diplomatic staff packed boxes. Their faces were pale under the harsh Sahel sun. In the courtyard, the U.S. flag fluttered in the breeze. It would be the last time it flew over Burkina Faso, inside the presidential palace. Captain Ibrahim Traoré gave a clear order. Write the decree. The entire U.S. embassy, not just the ambassador, must leave the country. They did not insult a man, he said. They insulted a nation, and Burkina Faso will not allow that to stand. His foreign minister hesitated. He reminded Traoré that no African country had ever expelled an entire U.S. embassy, that Washington would retaliate, that this was unprecedented. But Traoré didn't blink. He slammed his hand on the table. "We are already bleeding," he said. 2,000 of our people were killed last year. More than 2 million have been displaced from their homes. And yet they, writing from safe halls in Washington, dare to say that our soldiers are no different than the terrorists they die fighting. Tell me, what consequence is worse than dishonor? What cost is higher than silence? Before noon, the decree was signed. By nightfall, it was broadcast across the country. The government of Burkina Faso declared the U.S. embassy persona non grata. Its staff were ordered to leave within 72 hours. The American flag would no longer fly in Ouagadougou. Crowds gathered outside the embassy gates. When the U.S. Marines stepped forward to lower the flag, the air was filled with chants. Sovereignty is not for sale. Women danced. Young people waved Burkina Faso flags. Elders raised their hands in prayer. The moment felt less like a diplomatic act and more like a funeral for an era of dependence now ending. That evening, Traoré addressed the nation. His message was unshakable. "We are not expelling a building," he said. "We are expelling an attitude, the arrogance that has chained Africa for too long. Aid without respect is bondage. Partnership without dignity is fraud. We choose dignity. Even if we stand alone, we will stand as a nation, not as a colony." He looked into the camera and let the silence speak. Then he continued, "Some will call us reckless. But I ask you, is it reckless to defend the honor of those who fall every day on the Sahel front lines? Is it reckless to tell our children they inherit a land of pride, not a beggar's bowl?" At dawn on August 19th, black convoys rolled out of the embassy compound, escorted by security forces behind tinted windows. American staff looked out at the crowds still chanting in the streets. The steel gates closed behind them, for the first time in decades. The most powerful country in the world had no diplomatic foothold in Burkina Faso, inside the cabinet chamber. The debate turned practical. One minister warned, "Captain, we risk losing over $100 million in annual U.S. assistance, our clinics, our schools, our grain programs. What happens when that stops?" Traoré raised his hand. "Let them close their checkbooks," he said. "A school built on humiliation only teaches slavery. A clinic funded with contempt heals nothing. The real question is, what lesson do we leave our children? That their lives are worth aid, but not worth dignity." The room fell into silence. Outside, the last sounds of the departing American convoy faded into the night. But from rooftops across the city, one chant still echoed, "Sovereignty is not for sale." If this moment reminds you of a time your family sat together, watching the evening news, wondering who writes the world's stories, share your thoughts below. Just one sentence, one belief. Don't let this flame go quiet. The images traveled faster than the convoys, by dawn in Washington. The State Department was in crisis mode. Screens flickered with footage of the U.S. flag being lowered in Ouagadougou. An aide rushed into the Situation Room. "Mr. Secretary," he said, "Captain Ibrahim Traoré has expelled the entire embassy. This is not a dispute. It is a rupture." The secretary's reply was sharp. "Draft a statement immediately. This is diplomatic suicide for them." Within hours, news outlets carried the headlines. Burkina Faso risks international isolation. Analysts warned that over $100 million of aid, used for food, health, and education, could disappear overnight. But in Ouagadougou, Traoré was unshaken. Standing before his cabinet, he asked, "Do they think we trade dignity for dollars? Let them call it suicide. But what kind of life is worth living without honor?" In Paris, the mood was grim. France had already withdrawn troops from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso by 2023. "Now this," one diplomat muttered. "Traoré is cutting the last rope connecting him to Europe." In Brussels, EU officials issued cautious warnings about cooperation and consequences. But in Traoré's office, their words sparked no concern. "Isolation from what?" he asked. "From chains we never asked for?" Meanwhile, in Moscow, the reaction was the opposite. Russian state media hailed Traoré as a lion of sovereignty on television. Commentators called him a new symbol of African courage. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stood before microphones and said, "This is not madness, it is emancipation. Africa is showing it will not bow to neo-colonial dictates. We applaud Burkina Faso." In a private meeting, an aide asked quietly, "Captain, the Russians praise you loudly. Should we lean in their direction?" Traoré shook his head. "Let them speak," he said. "But remember, dignity is not for hire. We will not trade one master for another." In Beijing, the Chinese government said little. No speeches, no headlines. But behind the scenes, Envoys were quietly dispatched. China offered humanitarian aid, infrastructure investment, and new trade terms, with no conditions attached. The message was clear. We do not interfere. We partner. Traoré took note. The West threatens, he told his ministers. Russia applauds. China observes. Each plays a game. But we must hold the board. Elsewhere in the Muslim world, Ankara moved quickly. Turkey announced plans to expand hospitals, schools, and relief programs across the Sahel, a spokesperson said. Burkina Faso does not stand alone. We are ready as a bridge, a brother, and a partner in faith and development. Traoré listened carefully. So the world debates whether we are brave or mad, he said. But is it madness to demand respect, or is it bravery to walk away from dependence? Outside, the streets echoed with chants. Protesters held signs reading, "Our sovereignty is our survival." Students waved the green and red flag of the AES alliance, the military pact uniting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger since 2023, in Washington. The fear was spreading. One senator asked a panel of experts, "If a small nation like Burkina Faso can dismiss us, how many others might follow? What if Mali or Niger does the same?" The question hung in the room. The silence said more than words. In Paris, editorials grew darker. Traoré is playing with fire in the Sahel, one read. This is a powder keg. In Moscow, newspapers called him the young lion of Africa. In Beijing, state channels praised his strategic clarity. In Ankara, he was called a new brother of the Ummah, inside his cabinet room. Traoré reflected. They all have opinions, he said. Some fear collapse, some offer praise, some wait in silence. But none of them understand this. We are not performing for their approval. We are reclaiming our breath. And then, in front of the cameras, he made his boldest statement yet. This is not just about diplomacy, he said. This is about the African voice. For decades, the West has claimed the right to name us. Today, we reclaim that right. When a soldier dies defending Djibo or Kaya, do they call him a criminal? When our daughters are rescued from extremists, do they call their defenders abusers? Who gave them the authority to define our truth? The hall erupted in applause, but Traoré raised his hand for silence. This war, he said, is not only fought with bullets, it is fought with words, and words can wound deeper than knives. If you believe words matter, that how we name dignity, honor, or sacrifice shapes the future, leave a word below that gives you strength. One word, one truth. When the gates of the U.S. Embassy closed, the first questions didn't come from diplomats. They came from market stalls and schoolyards. Will rice cost more now? One mother asked a vendor in Ouagadougou, in local clinics. Nurses took stock of painkillers. Teachers looked at class lists, already shortened by school closures, for years. The United States provided more than $100 million annually to Burkina Faso, supporting food, medicine, and education, now. All of that was in question, inside the government chamber. Ministers argued fiercely. One rose to speak. Captain, if the U.S. cuts support, our public schools will collapse. 6,000 classrooms have already shut down due to insecurity. What happens if funding stops completely? Traoré looked at him calmly. Then we must ask, is a classroom built on shame a true classroom? Better no school today than a generation taught to kneel forever. His words hung heavy in the air. Yet outside, in a camp for the displaced, a farmer echoed them unknowingly. He wiped dust from his brow and told a reporter, "Maybe we'll go hungry, but better to be hungry in freedom than fed in chains." That sentence, aired on national radio, traveled fast. Families in rural villages repeated it like a prayer. In Washington, headlines turned harsh. Burkina Faso commits diplomatic suicide. Officials threaten to freeze funding, suspend cooperation. Analysts warned that without American grain shipments, rural provinces could face hunger within months. Was it worth the risk? Could anyone gamble with children's meals for the sake of pride? But in Ouagadougou's main square, the chants told a different story. "We are poor, but we are free," shouted a group of students. "We are small, but we decide." That night, Traoré convened his military council. Generals expressed concern. "Captain, if Western support ends, how will we fight jihadists?" Traoré walked slowly before answering. "They give us rifles but chain our tongues. They offer medicine, but poison our dignity. If Russia can supply tools without forcing submission, if China can build roads without preaching, why should we cling to those who despise us?" The room fell silent. But these weren't just theories. Moscow had already praised Traoré's move as bold and anti-colonial. Beijing quietly offered new trade credits. Turkey pledged more humanitarian hospitals. The Sahel Alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, vowed to pool resources and train regional forces. So the question shifted, not whether they could survive without aid, but whether they could hope by standing alone. One evening, Traoré visited a camp of displaced families. More than 2 million citizens had lost their homes to conflict. A small boy clutched his hand and whispered, "Captain, will we still have food?" Traoré knelt down and met the boy's gaze. "Maybe less food today," he said softly, "but more freedom tomorrow, and freedom feeds your soul long after bread is gone." The crowd stood silent. Then an elder spoke. "We've buried too many sons to kneel again. Let hunger test us. It will not break us." That night, the scene aired on national television. Commentators framed it as Captain Ibrahim's latest news, not weakness, but a leader standing shoulder to shoulder with his people, across radio stations. The child's words were repeated like prophecy. In Bamako, Mali's leaders declared, "This is the dawn of a Sahel that speaks for itself." In Niamey, Niger's generals pledged joint patrols. In Moscow, state media called Traoré the Lion of Sovereignty. In Beijing, no fiery words, just steady diplomacy, across continents. The debate raged, but in Ouagadougou, the questions became personal. Is it right to risk famine for dignity? Can aid ever replace self-respect? And once dignity is lost, does bread still taste the same? By late August, murals covered city walls, the American flag lowered, the AES flag rising underneath. One message: "We may have little, but it is ours." On radios, one phrase echoed again and again: "Sovereignty is not for sale." If you've ever wondered whether we can teach our children that freedom matters more than comfort, write down one thing you would never trade. Not because someone else will read it, but because you'll remember what you stand for. By late August 2025, the world was watching Burkina Faso closely in Washington. Senior officials grappled with shock and questions. Only months earlier, the U.S. military's top commander for Africa had publicly accused Captain Traoré of misappropriating Burkina Faso's gold reserves, sparking outrage from the junta and provoking widespread protests at home. Now, expelling the entire U.S. embassy signaled a defiant break. Reports from the State Department warned tourists and remaining personnel to avoid travel across northern and rural areas due to persistent threats from extremist groups. The U.S. emphasized that evacuation support was severely limited, underlying the growing instability back in Ouagadougou. That instability met unwavering resolve. Traoré's move raised regional alarm, particularly in ECOWAS capitals. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formally exited ECOWAS earlier that year, and their new alliance of Sahel states, AES, emerging as a counterweight, carried serious symbolism and strategic implications in Washington. Some lawmakers fretted that Burkina Faso's example might embolden other fragile states to shun long-standing partnerships. Analysts painted the action as a template of populist defiance. Still, others noted that by drawing closer to Moscow and Ankara, both offering aid and security cooperation without moral lectures, Burkina Faso was redefining alliances on its own terms. Meanwhile, human rights groups sounded alarms. Reports from Human Rights Watch confirmed the junta had previously expelled senior UN officials after the publication of sensitive reports documenting violations, especially against children, signaling intolerance for external scrutiny and raising fears of deepening isolation. Geopolitically, Burkina Faso's turn from the West was noticeable. A growing presence of Russian advisors, Chinese technical aid, Turkish humanitarian outreach, and AES regional integration signaled a shift in the balance of influence across the Sahel. From Russian state media came praise, calling Traoré a symbol of emancipation. China remained silent publicly, but quietly offered cooperation and infrastructure investment. Ankara positioned itself as a compassionate partner in faith and development. Even as the West recoiled, new friendships were being forged, yet fear lingered. Analysts cautioned that with ISIS-affiliated insurgents and JNEM carrying out some of the deadliest attacks of 2025 across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, a weakened Western presence could embolden jihadist groups. But Traoré remained unswayed. He framed this not as retreat, but as a reshaping of sovereignty. "We are not seeking to collapse," he declared. "We are choosing partners on our terms." A rare conviction echoed across the continent. If you believe that small nations can still rewrite their destiny against greater pressures, leave a word below. One word that carries the hope you believe in. Let that word be the seed of a future where dignity guides alliance. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, no one could deny this. Burkina Faso had chosen the harder road. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not just expel an embassy, he closed a chapter and opened one no one can predict. The risks ahead are real. Millions could lose access to medicine and food. Extremist groups still threaten border towns, and international institutions may turn away. Yet through every danger, one truth remains. The people of Burkina Faso are writing their story in their own hand. The question is not just for them, but for all of us. When a poor nation chooses dignity over aid, will the world listen? Can we tell the difference between righteous courage and reckless defiance? And if one small country dares to say no to global powers, how many others might be waiting their turn? In Bamako and Niamey, leaders are watching. In Paris and Washington, new doubts are rising. If Traoré succeeds, what does that mean for global order? If he fails, what does it say about African hope? When the American flag came down, it was more than a cloth leaving a pole. It was the end of one authorship, and when the AES flag rose to take its place, it was more than sovereignty. It was a desire that Africans define Africa's future. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone, not to argue, but to remind each other, dignity is not something to be traded away. And if you believe freedom, though fragile, is worth defending, write one word in the comments, a hope, a prayer, a vow, because sometimes one small voice is enough to keep the fire alive. And if you want to follow more stories like this, where truth, courage, and conscience speak together, click subscribe. Don't miss the next chapter. Help carry these voices forward in a world that often tries to silence them.